talking about inflation as well and, final budget outcome, $15 billion, great. But they're still in trouble. Labor sources telling you that, there's a bit of intel that shows they're in trouble in a fair few seats. Are they not? Absolutely, in New South Wales. And we saw a news poll talking about the average state-by-state figures. New South Wales, the primary vote's down to 30. Well, a Labor source has told me that right now they're behind in 4 marginal seats in New South Wales. Let's have a look at them. This is where Labor, I am told, and Bennelong, that's after redistribution of the margins, right? Yep. So that's why it's called Liberal there. Gilmore on the South Coast, Robertson on the Central Coast, Patterson in the Hunter, and Bennelong in Sydney. My source tells me, as things stand, Labor are behind in these key seats. Now, the source also talked to me about a, midterm slump, basically. Once they have a narrative and they come out the other side, they have a chance of retaining all of them. But as things stand, Laura, I can tell you now, Peter Dutton, if there was an election this weekend, would win all 4 of those seats, I am told, which, you chuck in 2 or 3 in Victoria, couple in WA, 1 in Tasmania maybe, 1 out of South Australia and Queensland, suddenly he's winning 11 seats. Yeah. So that's the task ahead for Labor, and that's why the Prime Minister feels so moved as to address the Cabinet publicly and say, look at what we're doing for you on inflation and cost of living. Yep. But they're going to have to come up with quite a story or a promise for a second term, aren't they? Well, I think they're just praying for a rate cut. But they will come up with something. But nothing will get past a rate cut. If they don't get a rate cut, they're going to lose 10 or 11 seats at least. So, What do the Teals do? What's going to happen to them? Well, I don't think that they will retain Curtin in Western Australia. Yeah. I think, obviously, Kylie Tink's going. Yep. They could lose 1 more. I don't think they'll lose many more than that. I think they'll still have around 4 or 5 seats. So they'll still be a significant block. But there are other independents we often, talk about in that hung parliament situation. Yeah. Wilkie, and Katter, potentially some Sharkey. Candidates that we don't know about yet. Yeah. That Simon Holmes could run and back. Yeah. You'd probably only expect 1 or more of those, I guess. But, yeah, you're right. I mean, you could see that sort of outcome in a safe Labor seat, couldn't you? You could see another Green winning because of the housing and rent situation. You could see an independent winning, a surprise result. Yeah. You spoke to Penny Wong yesterday as well. She's just come back from New York and she was there at a time where, the bombardment of Lebanon was in full flight. What has she said to you about a ceasefire? She's very careful with her language, the Foreign Minister. Well, she keeps pushing for this ceasefire, but it's not going to happen. So she's really wasting her breath. I mean, the US are doing the same, it has to be said, but Penny Wong told me the only way out of this is a 2-state solution. Well, people have been working on a 2-state solution since the 40s and no one's managed it. So I just can't see how that sort of logic works. There's got to be another way out, as I put to her in a question. Look, I'll play you a couple of exchanges from the interview. Here's the first one on a ceasefire.
The international community has agreed rules. Even in war, there are rules. Even when attacking terrorists, there are rules. We agreed them as an international community 75 years ago in the Geneva Conventions because we understood what it means when humanity goes into conflict with no rules.
What is the end game to this conflict, including in Gaza, to the Israeli government, do you think?
That's a very good question. And what is the end game? And one of the points that we have made and many others have made, that ultimately the end game should be peace and security in the region, peace and security for Israelis, peace and security for the people of Israel, and that will require a 2-state solution. That is the only pathway to long-term peace and security for both Israelis and for Palestinians.
Do you think there's any aspect of the approach of Benjamin Netanyahu which is affected by the fact the US are about to go to an election and he thinks he may have a different administration to deal with?
You'll have to ask Prime Minister Netanyahu that.
What's your belief?
Well, that's an opinion that I think I'll leave to you and other commentators.
So really pleading for a two-state solution. But I had to check this. She's retaining a stance that the government talked about a while ago, which is no one from the Hamas leadership can be in that two-state, in government, in Palestinian Authority, to be in that two-state solution. So how realistic is that? So you say the only way out of this is a two-state solution, but the only way we can have a two-state solution is to have no one from Hamas in there. So good luck with that, I suppose.
And I suspect that not even the Palestinian Authority, the West Bank element of this would be at all palatable either for the Israelis. So it's intractable. Well,
this is where this criticism comes from the opposition. You're talking to a domestic political audience. You're not talking in reality. But here was the Foreign Minister yesterday. You made comments once again supporting a Palestinian state just now. What's the government's position on the requirements for that? Would you have a requirement after the October 7 attacks that there would have to be a ban of Hamas membership of any government before that could occur, or do you think some remnants of that leadership could remain?
Well, I've said that there is no place for terrorists in a future Palestinian government, and Hamas is a terrorist organisation. I've said that there has to be reform of the Palestinian Authority, but fundamentally you have to ensure that any Palestinian state did not threaten the security and viability of Israel.
Changing tack just a little bit here.
Still talking about war.
We are, but let's talk about Chinese technology in electric vehicles. This is something that the US is really concerned about. It feels like we've seen this movie, a fictional movie, but Barnaby Joyce is actually worried about this. He's
worried about more than electric cars. He's worried about Chinese-made solar panels being exploded. So where does this start and end? That's the concern. Now, this is a bloke who used to serve on the National Security Committee of Cabinet, so you can't just dismiss this. And he wouldn't answer me here whether he'd heard about this concept of cars being remote controlled. And look, you might even scoff at that, but the pages blew up, didn't they, in the Middle East? They got that to happen.
So solar panels exploded.
Oh, man. Modern warfare is very scary indeed. This is the former Deputy Prime Minister on the program yesterday.
People have got to start asking the questions, like if you can update the software, if you can track these vehicles, if they're made in China, if there was a malevolent purpose behind it from a totalitarian state, what might be the consequences of that? Also, I might add, Andrew, there are 200,000 solar heaters, Chinese-made solar heaters, sitting on roofs around Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and the rest of the countryside. And we've had people who are expert in that field saying, you should have a closer look at exactly what you've done there, especially after the pager and the walkie-talkie issue with Hezbollah and what the Israelis were able to do. You think if the Israelis were able to do it, would another country with a malevolent purpose be able to do it to Australia?
During your time in government, did you ever hear about any sort of scenario like this with the pagers or the electric vehicles in security discussions? Were experts suggesting to you this sort of thing could occur?
Well, the problem with that, Andrew, is as former Deputy Chair of the National Security Committee, I could be in line for about 15 years in jail. So if I did know that, I don't think I'd be putting it on national television.
Okay. Well, did he have these kind of briefings when he was on the National Security Committee of Cabinet? Doesn't sound like he did.
I reckon it sounds like he did.
Didn't want to.
Well, he just said, I'll go to jail if I tell you.
Okay. Let's talk about negative gearing then. Take that as a yes. Negative gearing. This is, we spoke about this time last week about where it's going. That's right. So where's it at? A week on. I mean, there is still some on the Labor backbench who think it's a great idea. I spoke to Saul Leslow that said, if you want to go down the fairness route, limit the number of homes you can negatively gear. But
it's hard to argue with that, by the way.
Absolutely, it's hard. But for the political pain, it would be the thin edge of the wedge argument. You can see where the coalition go with it, and it doesn't raise enough revenue for it to be worth it for you, I think.
As you mentioned last Wednesday. But I would say I was pretty proven...
The risk of repeating myself.
Proven right on that story. No, I thought it was a very good point at the time. And now, this is the issue. I mean, you do it for a fairness argument. Yeah. You got political hit. Doesn't even get you that much more money. So, but look, the big question in Canberra, and Cameron Milner's been out there, he's a guy, Jim Chalmers... stopped from running for Lilly and put Annika Wells in there. So he's got his own motives, Cameron Milner, but he's been saying, well, Jim leaked this, right? Well, I'm told Jim didn't leak this. I guess it's a question of whether the Treasurer did enough to smash it. And it seems pretty obvious too that he actually sought the advice, which is you're not seeking the advice unless you're thinking about actually doing it, making the change. And as I said last week, even though it's not happening now, and I doubt it'll happen, this is an ambition of Jim Chalmers to tweak negative gearing since he worked for Wayne Swan before he was in the Parliament. So, he really does believe in this. That's why there'll always be suspicion. And look, there's no doubt it's been a damaging leak for the government. They wanted to be talking about inflation that Albanese just in Cabinet was trying to, and on that very day, boom, they're going to look at negative gearing. So Barnaby Joyce, well, here's another one who's just saying Jim leaked it before he went to China.
After 20 years, I'm a bit of a cynic in this. I did get a sense that Treasurer Jim had basically loaded up a poo sandwich and then disappeared to China behind 3 Chinese aircraft carriers and saw how the Prime Minister performed. But of course, that's not it. Then we heard the story that they didn't know who modelled it. It was like someone else started modelling selling Melbourne to Moldova. I don't know who. It just happened. They're free spirits down there at the Treasury, and they do this sort of stuff. Just wake up in the morning and come up with crazy ideas and go out to work, and taxpayer pays for it. Well, of course they're modelling it, and they're modelling it because they envisaged, at least they had the thought of changing it. You wouldn't model something if you had no sense whatsoever or no wish at all to change it. And then when we ask the questions, we get these weasel answers.
Look, that's a bit cheeky from Barnaby. He knows how this works. You can't criticise the government for not undertaking, a reform agenda and then criticising them when they seek modelling from Treasury. And also, we don't know whether this modelling was just done alone. Perhaps Jim was looking at what is required, and that is a look at things like GST, negative gearing, capital gains, stamp duty and these inefficient taxes. So maybe. I don't think you can go down the path of criticising any treasurer who seeks modelling and says, there's a smoking gun.
We're not even at first base if you're just seeking modelling, are you? So, that's why last week I called it a beat-up, but it's a fair enough beat-up, I guess. It's got the hairs running. There'll be ample opportunity to ask him at 12 at his press conference if journalists can do that. But I think another interesting ingredient to this is Jim Chalmers is mates with Claire O'Neill, the housing minister. So I can't find out. I believe he did ask for this advice. I can't find out, and these are the key questions, when or why he did that. And I wonder if it coincides with Claire O'Neill going into that portfolio.
That's right. And I would also say that with these, beat-up type stories and these leaks and we're latching on to modelling, it is a symptom of there being a lack of big policy for us to pick over. So that in and of itself is a problem for this government. It has been this term. I think they're rattled since the voice. And if you look at, if they lost this election, which I don't think they will, but if they lost this election, you go, what was their legacy? Well, it's a failed voice referendum that dominates that narrative. It's
a good point. I had a Labor source say to me the other day, no matter what happens on election night, we'll be talking about what this person called the lost year of the voice. They spent that middle year talking about the voice when it could have been a lot of other things. And I think, when it comes to the federal election coverage, no matter what the result, and a hung parliament looks likely, that will be an absolute point of discussion, and you'll probably hear some Labor people unencumbered by an election having gone talking about it as well.
Yeah, and I would say some proponents of the yes within government still don't quite get it. They think that was those bad actors that messed up the messaging for them, where there is a real underlying uncomfortableness with the Australian public about how that was pushed, but. Conversation for another time, perhaps.
Yeah, we could go on forever, couldn't we? Anyway, fair enough.
We tend to on these Mondays. Andrew, good to see you. We'll see you soon.